Okay, in our previous session, we talked about the nature of politics and literature and how we identify that and how we organize it. And so we talked about one category of politics and literature, and that is the kind of stuff that's explicitly political. And we gave two sort of subgenres of that. One is the dictator novel, and we're reading a selection out of that genre for purposes of this course. And we also identified another area that's explicitly political, and those are our dystopian novels. And there's a long tradition of that. They go back for centuries. And dystopian, sometimes referred to as utopian novels, are continuing to evolve. And not only do they tell us something about politics, but in many ways they express politics as well. That is, they give vent to the anxieties and the concerns that are present in society in any particular point in time. At this point, we'd like to talk about a second category than a politics literature, and this category it's much broader. And at some point, we might be tempted to think, well, what is not included in this category? And certainly there are things that are excluded. There are many works of fiction, works of literature that are not a part of this category, but it is much broader. And let's try to introduce it in this way. And once again, we're going to refer to Aristotle. You might recall in the previous session, we talked about Aristotle's Poetics, which is a discussion, among other things, of the way in which drama will engage us. That is, it'll engage the imagination, the passions, in a way that prose will not. And so we refer to a couple of his other works at this point. One would be his Ethics, sometimes called the Nicomachean Ethics, named after one of his sons. We also refer to the Politics. And we could argue that the Politics is the most important work ever produced in political philosophy. Some might say that it's Republic. There are other candidates for that position, but it's very, very important. And you can also argue that the Ethics is the most important work ever produced in moral philosophy, although, once again, that could be debatable, but certainly I think we could say nothing is more important. And we could even throw into that mix Aristotle's work, The Rhetoric, which is all about persuasive speech in the way that those especially in leadership, but any kind of orator, can best get his or her message across. So when we're looking at things in this particular context, then Aristotle's concerns in these works have to do with what is a good life, what makes a good person, what makes for a good community. And so, in this sense, political literature is concerned with how can we best live together, how can we best live individually, and what kind of political order will best support that. And furthermore, what about the fine arts? What about the liberal arts? What about education? Now, again, at this point, we might say, aren't we throwing too much into this? And the answer to that, I think, has to be, but it's all relevant. It's all very relevant. And so we're looking now for literature to help us to look at these particular types of considerations. I think it's also helpful to understand that for the Greeks, for the philosophical Greeks, the political order, the social order, society, private life, and public life were in many ways a seamless whole. They were not easily separated. In the modern age, we separate those out in a lot of different ways, and it's important to do that for our purposes, but to understand the reason that all of these considerations go into a study of literature and politics, it is, to reiterate, helpful to understand that we can't completely separate all of these spheres of our life, and therefore questions that pertain to one sphere pertain to the next sphere as well. So it's helpful then, and let's spend a little bit more time in this session, and we'll pick it back up for one more session by looking at some of the literature that addresses this broad range of questions that we were talking about at this point. We might begin by asking the question, what is a good family life? Aristotle did note in his Politics that every community is built on the family, and of course the political order is built on the community. So what makes for a good family life? One very important novel that asks that question is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and it has a very famous beginning, and I paraphrase in some measure, in which the first line asks the question, well, it puts it in the form of an assertion, saying that families go bad for a number of reasons, but good families all follow the same principle. So there are a variety of ways you can go bad, but there are only there's really only one way, that is a collection of principles that will define a good family. Another interesting look at the needs of individuals in the family, and especially the needs of young people, is in the short story by Cervantes in his Novelas Ejemplares, and another short story, Rinconete y Cortadillo, which is about juvenile delinquents. It's about kids who have no place to go. And what's very interesting about this particular short story is it treats the question of freedom. We might think of kids who break away from their families, kids who fall into juvenile delinquency, are after freedom. And what Cervantes seems to tell us in this particular short story about two young men who have left their families is what they are really looking for, even more than freedom, is a sense of belonging. And so that helps us to understand, I think, in many ways, why when individuals don't have a family of their own, they try to recreate it in some way or the other. And that goes a long way, I think, to helping us to formulate the sort of social policy that ought to be present to support in ways that it's appropriate for the public to support family life, that family life be supported, or at the very least that our governmental structure not compete with the family. That is, it lets the family do what the family should do. Another really important question has to do with war. When is war just? When is war unjust? Is war always immoral, or can war be moral? And so two really important novels that deal with that question are, number one, War and Peace, once again by Tolstoy, and then a more contemporary novel, All Quiet on the Western Front, that was written about World War I and is a rather grim existentialist look at the nature of warfare. And another really provocative question that is dealt with all the time, if not in sometimes it's dealt with in literature, but it's dealt with all the time in cinema these days, and that is, what is the nature of evil? Even more, is there a devil? Does he exist? Or is it just an abstraction? And so at this point, we might look at another Russian author, Dostoevsky, and his novels The Possessed, and his novel The Brothers Karamazov.